All right. I'm going to follow Joe's lead and introduce all three speakers at the same time, and then we'll go ahead and move forward from there. Last year, I think, with a focus on model-assisted estimation from the Joint Program in Survey Methodology at the University of Maryland. Today, Ben will discuss leveraging survey methods to improve administrative record estimates. And just in general, we're going to be looking in this session at harmonization of data across surveys. Our second speaker, who's sitting right in front here, is Don Jong, who is Vice President at NORC and Director of its Center for Excellence in Survey Research. Before joining NORC in 2016, Don was Director of Data Science and Statistics of Mathematica Policy Research. Here, Don will present on data harmonization and survey data integration. And our third speaker will be joining via WebEx. He is Scott Holand, a professor in the Statistics Department at the University of Missouri. He obtained his PhD under Manny Parsons at Texas A&M University. With Noel Cressy and Chris Weichel, Scott provides leadership for one of the NSF Census Research Center, and that center focuses on improving the interpretability and usability of the ACS through hierarchical, multi-scale, spatial, temporal, statistical models. So he's drawing on that work today, where he'll highlight recent advances in spatial and spatiotemporal change of support for official statistics. But, Ben, I messed up your slide.
That's fine.
So you can handle that? All right, Ben, thank you.
Okay. This is some really early work that kind of started this summer from just a conversation that rolled into kind of a basic research proposal. The basic start of this question was, can we use a survey to improve administrative record estimates instead of starting from the idea that we're going to make estimates out of our survey and how to use administrative records to better that. And we all know different ways that we can use administrative records, and it's typically used to use administrative records to benefit survey estimates. Early in sample designs, more recent, this is kind of my work in Center for Adaptive Design, is a lot in data collection monitoring. We use administrative records. And then there's lots of literature about estimation and weighting, editing and imputation, and basically a type of imputation where we just directly substitute administrative records. And then you'll see it a lot in evaluations that are done, specifically non-response bias studies, which are, if anybody knows about OMB packages and your response rates dropping, we're all doing non-response bias studies, and then other measurement error evaluations typically used. So here are some possible data quality issues associated with ad-rec estimates if you're just making an estimate about the population from administrative records. So one of the major ones, and this has been addressed especially in work done in censuses in Europe using registers, is coverage, right? So using a sample of parts of your register that you don't have enough information for, or an area sample where you think you might have low quality in your register to deal with a coverage issue. Okay. And then measurement. And this is the one that people get the most concerned about, right? There's unknown measurement issues that you just don't have any idea about, but then there's a lot of them that we do have ideas about. Time lags, differences in definitions between what you want to measure and what is available in the administrative record. So how can we possibly use a survey to deal with these? Well, in the best case scenario, this is what you would have. You'd have a frame that covers your entire population, which is the big box. You would know where your administrative records didn't cover your frame, and you would have some idea of this high-quality administrative records and some low-quality administrative records. That's very crude, but basically, you would spend your time using a survey to improve your low-quality records. You wouldn't spend very much of your effort in high-quality, and in no administrative records, you would need to estimate that through the survey. Okay? So this is very idealized, right? So, like I said, the coverage issue, you're going to basically have to use a survey in this setting to estimate where the coverage issue that you're having with the administrative records. For measurement, there's kind of two things that I would propose. One of them is figure out how to use a survey to adjust the administrative records. And the other one is to monitor with some of your sample that green box of the high-quality administrative records, because this is probably not a static picture. So today I'm going to kind of flesh out a little bit of an idea of how you might be able to adapt survey methods or use survey methods in this kind of new way of thinking about estimation where you put the administrative records first. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to possibly use some overlapping frame methodology and then some adjusted kind of model-assisted estimation, specifically generalized difference estimators. Or in this case, we will only discuss GREGs, but it can be, or generalized regression estimators, but it can be extended to other types of models. So, some basic idea of overlapping frames. If you have two frames, there's a piece that I call little a here that is only in frame A. There's what I call little b, which is only in frame B. And then there's this where they overlap, right, where it's AB, okay? So the only in A only can be estimated from A, right, from that frame, in the sample in that frame. The only in the piece not in the intersection there can only be estimated, and that's the first term, sorry, the A in the formula for total below. And then all the way on the other end is, in this formula, is the total that can only be estimated by frame B, which is outside of the intersection just in B. And then in the intersection, we could use frame A or frame B to estimate that area, right, or that part of the total. So traditionally what we do here is we actually do the estimation for both from frame A and from frame B for the intersection. And then we kind of average over them, right? We take based on some lambda. And there's a lot of literature about what to pick there. The really, kind of standard thing, and the thing that actually seems to be used a lot in practice, and a survey that I used to work on, the National Survey of College Graduates, would just use what I call the McCarty value, which is just, in this case, half. So you're just really taking the average of the two estimates. So this is what we're really facing, though, with administrative records, right? So we have the total population, and if we make the assumption that actually we can survey everybody and that there's no coverage issue there that the administrative records would pick up, then we could say we have overlapping frames. But we have actually a little bit simpler issue here, right? Because the administrative records is not measuring anything outside the population. Okay? And this does assume one major thing that kind of goes back to the prior session, which is you have to have some type of linkage, right, of your administrative records to that sampling frame, the purple. Right? So we have this more simple formula here where we have from the survey kind of estimate, which is the purple including the blue, we have an estimate of the administrative records area, and for the administrative records, we have the estimate of the blue area, and then the purple that's not in the blue outside of the administrative records, we have a total that we can only get from the sample that we take. Okay, and this sort of comes from a paper from Moore and Brick, where they look at two surveys, and actually one of them is much more expensive, but they take as a gold standard. The other one, much less expensive, but has some error. And they use a different technique that I'm going to use here to estimate this additive error here, this delta. But this is seen to be the the additive measurement error of the administrative records in this formula. Okay. So how do we estimate delta? So if we're using a direct substitution and we make a strong assumption that the survey is the gold standard, right? Then we can use basically the weighted sum of the residuals to calculate that delta. So this the W is just the sampling weight from the survey. The YIS is the value that you got from the survey, and the YIA is the value you get from the administrative record. Okay? So this gives you a direct estimate from the survey of that error in the administrative records. So if you go back to the overlapping frame idea, you can then plop in that estimate for delta, and now we have an estimate with the survey being a gold standard of the total, where we have taken advantage of the administrative records covering the whole part of that blue area of the population, then use the sample to adjust using the sum of the residuals, and actually that inside part of the left there ends up being actually a gray estimator with an intercept of 0 and a slope of 1. So basically substitution. And then you have the parts estimated directly by the survey. And then you use the same type of averaging with the lambda between the adjusted administrative records and the direct survey estimate for that area, or for the administrative record coverage area. So there is one thing that we point out here, if you're looking at mean squared error. I've now just injected a bunch of sampling variance in here in exchange for hedging against bias. Okay. So this assumption of the gold standard of the survey, although as survey methodologists, a lot of times we kind of fall back on that surveys are better or than administrative records, it's a really strong assumption. And it also is wrong in many cases, right? We have many cases in surveys where we get sign off from a respondent to go actually do a record check or talk to their doctors or do things because we don't actually believe that they have good recall. And so there are many ways that we actually already know that this is not a great assumption. And then you can do out the work and try to make the same adjustments and everything by taking the administrative records as the better of the two, but really everything ends up falling out and just saying you only need to deal with coverage if you take the administrative record as the gold standard. Okay. So there's a really nice paper by Martha Stinson and John Aboud, where they take this kind of same approach when they're looking at modeling in survey income and program participation, W-2 income and income reported, and kind of not actually taking either as the gold standard and kind of looking at different levels of how sure you are that one or the other is a gold standard that I've now adapted here. This adds another parameter in here, which are these omegas. So basically, omega S is your guess or your estimate of the probability that you think the survey is right. And the omega A is the probability that you assume that the administrative record is correct, or estimate is correct, and put this constraint that the omegas have to sum to 1. So, and this allows you either to use some other information to make some appeal for which one is more likely to be and how much more likely to be or more accurate, but it also allows you to do sensitivity analysis, right? So in Martha and John's paper, they do a bunch of different sets of omegas to kind of look at, if you make an assumption of one or the other being more likely true, what's the kind of difference in the estimate that you get. So I'm not going to go through them here, but this is easily refined in different ways. One of them is that this is pretty broad, right? This is saying that the overlapping frame parameter should be the same across the whole population, and that those omegas should be the same across the entire population. And that kind of seems very broad. And so you can actually break this out so you're basically stratifying the population into domains where these might be different. This could, example of this, especially with the omegas, one of the things that we have talked about in letting the omegas vary is what percentage of a county or a tract from the 5-year ACS estimate has moved in the last year, right? So administrative records that lag might have less confidence in the administrative records with a higher percentage of households that have moved in the last year. And that's something standard that we put out on the planning database and is available in American Fact Finder down to the block group level and definitely at the tract level. So that's one idea. Then also the model of the substitution. So the administrative record does not necessarily have to be exactly measuring what the survey is measuring or what your actual outcome that you're in. And there's a bunch of work that generalizes the Gregg estimator. So one, it could just be a more complex linear model than just a direct substitution. But it also could be used to have other, the more generalized difference estimator. And there's been work done by Wu and Sitter for GLMs. And there's been a bunch of work on nonparametric models by Jay Bright and John Opsimer and their students. And then there's my dissertation work, which is actually on time-to-event models in this framework that could be used for certain type of longitudinal data. And then this actually very easily generalizes to using multiple sets of administrative records. Because if you come back to this, this only has one blue area within the purple. But you could have many administrative records that overlap in many different ways and assume that each of them are right or not, and that the survey is right or not, and that the formula all generalizes, it just gets really messy. Okay. Okay. So there's a lot of open questions. So one of them is I've just talked about here that the survey has 100% response, which we know is not true. And so how do we deal with the non-response in the survey? And Brick's done a work in this kind of area of where and when to do adjustments and how to use calibration to kind of deal with non-response in an overlapping frame situation that possibly could be looked at, but is yet to be kind of at least looked at I've yet to look at. The other one that gets kind of tricky is how to allocate this sample, right? So you're looking at which domains, if you may do it in domains, to allocate the sample to estimate the error versus to put in the coverage area, and how does that necessarily change from information you know from year to year if you're doing an annual survey. And since I work for the Center for Adaptive Design, I have to think about this adaptively as well. And there's some stuff we've looked at in other settings in the adaptive clinical trial literature. There's issues that they use sample boosting in a lot of times where they roll out sample over time. This is actually something that in another adaptive design kind of context that NCES has used, where they've used early samples to inform what they should do about other types of interventions in later parts of the survey. That's kind of this flavor, right? You put out some sample, you learn which areas have larger amounts of error than other areas, and then you allocate sample as you go along based on what you learn about the properties of the different domains. Okay. And then how do we do this in a multivariate setting, right? I've only talked about one estimate for one survey, and in some contexts, we might be able to get away with one or two estimates, like in monthly establishment surveys. But especially on the demographic side, and even in more complex establishment survey side, we're talking about lots of estimates. So this points to a new role for data collection. It first has to assist us in updating the probabilities that the administrative records are correct in each domain. That actually might be quite expensive, right? But it might be very useful every couple of years to do really intensive work to actually estimate these omegas for different domains. And then it takes the survey back from the forefront and really turns it into an adjustment for bias and undercoverage, and from undercoverage and for measurement error in administrative records. And then this other piece, which we sort of talked about at the beginning, but I feel like some of the samples should be sacrificed not just for reducing variance, but also to be spread around in places where we think the administrative records are really good and our omegas are, that we've estimated are pretty highly likely that the administrative records are right. But we want to monitor and make sure that that's really a good assumption. Okay.
We're going to hold all questions and comments till the end and till we get the broad picture. So, Don, and the thing I didn't know is figure out is how to do this. Have you figured it out?